Hi, I'm Lori Rozakis. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions Upgrade Your Writing series. This is the 8th program in the series, Expressing Yourself Creatively. Well, first of all, how can you be creative? Good creative writing opens a window into who you are, and so that your reader can learn more about you. It can also hold up a mirror so that your reader might learn something about themselves as well. Being creative means expressing your personality. What makes you tick? Is it music, movies, or sports? What is your passion? Often, the best creative writing expresses or triggers some strong emotion. If you're having trouble deciding what you should write, think about these questions. Whom or what do you love? Who or what makes you angry? Who or what inspires you? What are your wildest dreams? What are your biggest fears? Thinking about questions like these can help you unlock that creativity. There are many ways that you can brainstorm to start a creative writing project. We covered many different pre-writing techniques in the first program in this series. Let's try one now. Pause the program and spend a few minutes pre-writing about the topic of, let's say, music. Maybe you want to write about a song or a piece of music that inspires you in some way or that means something to you. Or maybe it's a performer who inspires you, or maybe even a whole genre. Remember that a genre is a type of music or literature. So perhaps you're inspired by jazz, or you're inspired by rock music, or you're inspired by gospel music. Whatever it is, take a few moments now and use listing, webbing, charting, storyboarding, or some other pre-writing technique to get some ideas down about music as it matters to you. Now, that's the key to this creativity, how that music matters to you. Don't worry yet about whether you're going to turn your pre-writing into a poem, a short story, or anything else. At this time, just let your ideas come out, then come back. Now remember, as you learned in that first program, pre-writing is a relatively fast technique. You shouldn't spend a half an hour on this. Leave yourself perhaps 5, maybe 10 minutes at most. I chose the topic of jazz because I love jazz, and since one of my friends, Darnell, is a jazz musician, he plays a string bass, so I was really interested in this. Jazz is the type of music that makes me feel really good. It inspires that passion and that creativity in me. So I chose that, and I hope that you chose some kind of music that makes you feel passionate as well. I used a web to brainstorm my ideas about jazz. I wrote jazz in the center of that web with Darnell in one of the circles. I also made some other circles in my web, each containing people, places, things, ideas, images, words, and phrases that I think of when I think of jazz. Now, here's my exact answer. I have nightclubs, swing dancing, Billie Holiday, Harlem, New Orleans, African American history, syncopation, smoky, and the blues. Some of these words may make sense to you. For example, New Orleans, because jazz is big in New Orleans, and others of them only make sense to me. But that's okay, because this is my pre-writing. Now, some of these ideas probably won't end up in my final piece of writing, whatever that's going to be. But that's okay too, because at this point, I'm just trying to unlock my creativity and get those ideas down on paper. Maybe I'll end up writing a short story about the rich history of jazz in New Orleans. Or maybe I'll write a poem about Darnell and a daydream of his, where he's playing the blues with Billie Holiday in a smoky Harlem nightclub. Who knows? But I do know that I've gotten some ideas down on paper. And this exercise is about finding something that matters to me, and of course something that matters to you, and exploring some of the different qualities of the topic. If it matters to you and you feel passionate about it, chances are very good that your audience will feel that same excitement that you feel, and that when you've transformed that passion into literature, you've created a very good piece of creative writing. So I'm going to set my pre-writing aside for now, as you will with yours, and we'll come back to it later. Just because we're being creative, though, doesn't mean that we're sort of working without a net. Creative writing has a series of guidelines or rules or ideas or conventions, however you want to phrase it, that you'll use not only to help spark your creativity, but also to express your ideas. That's what we're going to look at now. Let's start with the types of creative writing. We call this a genre. Genre is the word for the type of literature or the type of music, for example. In literature, some very popular genres are novels, poetry, and plays or drama. You can also have the genre of nonfiction. You can write creatively in any genre you like. Feel free to explore the different genres. You might find that one topic works very well in one genre and may not work as well in another genre. Each genre, however, follows a set format regarding its length and its content. For example, there are standard conventions regarding short stories and poetry. Learning these guidelines will help you become a more creative writer because it will give you a framework into which to pour your creativity. You can apply what you learn about creative writing in this program to many other types of writing that you do as well. So keep that in mind as you're learning these techniques. They don't apply just to short stories or just to poetry, for example. You can take many of the techniques that you learn from poetry and to use them in your non-poetic writing, in your prose. Now, again, being creative still means that you've got to follow those rules of standard written English. Otherwise, you run the risk of confusing your reader and being misunderstood. So, you must still spell your words correctly, follow the rules of punctuation, and follow the rules of usage. Let's take a look at some of those genres right now that you can write creatively. Two of the ones that you're most apt to try are short stories and poems. And the reason is that short stories are relatively short, and poems are as well. Short stories are generally classified as creative because they entertain rather than explain or persuade. Poems are generally classified as creative writing, because they're more personal and emotional than expository writing such as essays or textbooks, magazine and newspaper articles. When you write a magazine or a newspaper article, what you're doing is reporting on an event. When you write a poem, you're usually reflecting on an emotion or a feeling. Let's start with short stories. The term is a little bit misleading because what do we mean by short? Well, generally a short story is a prose narrative that has fewer than 30,000 words. On average, a short story runs between perhaps 2,000 to 7,000 words. Let's take another look at that definition. It's a prose narrative. Prose means non-poetry. And you remember you learned a narrative is a story. So a short story is not poetry. It's in a story form, and it's generally 2,000 to about 7,000 words. Remember that for a moment. Every short story has the following 6 elements. A short story has a point of view, a conflict, character or characters, a setting, a plot, and a theme. And we're going to go over each of those in detail. As with all narratives, as with all stories, well, actually as with all writing, above all, a short story has to keep your reader's interest. It has to entertain your readers. We could make the point that a short story must do this because otherwise, why would anybody bother reading it? After all, they're not reading it for information. They're reading it for pleasure. Edgar Allan Poe was a writer and a critic who really defined what the short story was. Edgar Allan Poe said the short story has to have 3 main qualities. It has to have a single effect, it has to be brief, and it has to have a preconceived design. Let's take a look at those in detail. By a single effect, Poe meant that the story had to have one overriding feeling to it. The feeling of mystery. And every single word in his stories goes to that single effect. He doesn't go off on tangents. He stays on the horror, the terror, and the mystery. Number 2, he said it has to be brief. Now, he didn't give us a word count of 2,000 to 7,000. Poe said that a short story has to be able to be read in one sitting. And by one sitting, he thought the average person could sit and read for between about an hour and an hour and a half. So that was his definition of short. And the third thing Poe said is a short story has to have a preconceived design. You don't just start writing and see where it takes you. Instead, you sit down before and you plan it out. Now, you started doing a plan like that when you did your pre-writing. You brainstormed some ideas. Remember that word smoky? Maybe that would give you your single effect. What Poe did is he planned it out very carefully before he started writing so that every single thing went to that single effect, the preconceived design. Let's start now with the first thing you've